Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Taking the Lead. I'm your host, you know this, Ken Jacobs of Jacobs Consulting and Executive Coaching. And in Taking the Lead, the video podcast, we get to interview leaders from the PR and comms and marketing, etc. space. Um, we don't talk all that much about PR or comms or marketing, a little bit maybe. But if you've seen this before, and I hope you're a returning fan, you know that it's all about leadership. And that can mean different things to different people. And we're going to find out today what it means to Torod B. Neptune. He is recently the assistant professor of strategic communications and reputation management at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Lovely area, great school. Previously, he was Senior VP of Marketing, Chief Comms Officer, Medtronic, and Chair of the Medtronic Foundation. That's important to mention. Worldwide Group VP of Marketing and CCO at Lenovo, Corporate VP, Global Corporate Comms and Public Affairs, and a lot of other positions with Verizon and positions before that, but we're not going to share all of that. Um, he has taken the executive leadership experience capstone at the Harvard Business School and holds an MS in comms management from my alma mater. There's a lot of orange behind me. The SI Newhouse School of Public Communications. Go Qs, go orange. But we crossed paths, and Tarad reminded me of this. We crossed paths many years ago when I was at Maloney and Fox, and he was at WE, WagEd, um, Wagner Edstrom, for those of you old enough, many years ago. I'm really excited to share with you the leadership wisdom of Torod B. Neptune. Welcome.
Thanks, Ken. Great to be here with you.
So we're going to dig right in. A question we like to ask a lot of our guests. Three leaders, inside PR, outside PR, who have personally inspired you the most, and of course, why?
Great question. Three, I'd say uh, Winston Churchill has always been one for
Interesting.
his resilience and the command of language in a crisis.
Okay.
I'd say Nelson Mandela for being uncompromised in a vision for what he wanted. And then perhaps more recently to PR, one of my former mentors, managers, Pam Edstrom,
Mhm.
uh, was a great leader for a number of reasons, but someone that I still quote today in mentoring and being mentored, even though I refer to her quite often.
Wonderful. Very disparate group. I don't know. Usually see Churchill and Mandela together, so that's very interesting. Um, when I think of Churchill, I think his leadership of the British, I guess it was the Empire at that point, um, through the Great War, especially the Battle of Britain, the Blitzkrieg. I mean, just having such faith, despite the odds that they could get through it, which was rather remarkable. They had every reason to lose hope, to have fear, but he encouraged them to just fight on, blood, sweat, toil, and tears. So that story fortunately had a happy ending. Now, your career trajectory has included leadership roles, agencies, corporations, and now you're teaching at the college level. How fortunate for your students, at Chapel Hills. So let's start with in what ways is leading in each of those locations a little different?
It's a great question. I'd first say I think leadership is the same across different contexts. I think how you go about displaying that, expressing that is unique to the environment. And so while I'd say I lead in a different way today as an academic versus how I led in corporate or led in agencies, the traits that I consider foundational to leadership have been consistent.
And what would they be?
Sure, it's a great question. I'd say things leadership at its core shares several universal qualities, regardless of where the context. And so I think of things like vision and direction, communication, influence, inspiration, and I'd add adaptability. Core foundational components of leadership, regardless of where you practice the discipline.
All of those are so important. Why is adaptability so critical uh, in 2025?
Yeah, I think it's been critical always. To your point, it is even more critical today when you think about the complexity of the world we live in, the challenges of unifying publics, which is at the core, what we do in this craft that we practice. And I think the challenge of adapting to an environment so that you can provide wise, sage counsel is even more critical when there is just nonstop disruption that's happening around you. And so I think that capability is one of the things that's allowed our function to shine so much in the last few years in the midst of what is, our current, global reality.
So let's go a little bit deeper on leadership and communications. Let's start with two-part question. Let's start with why must leaders be highly skilled communicators, even if they're not in PR or comms or CCO or CMOs? Why must they be highly skilled communicators to be truly effective as leaders?
Another great question. And so I have always been of the view that communications is a leadership competency, separate from, again, the craft that we often refer to as communications. And so I spoke consistently and still do to this day to leaders as your first primary job is a communications job.
Hmm.
And I think to be truly effective, leaders have to be able to communicate primarily because it is the sole bridge between vision and execution.
Ooh.
You
I,
cannot
th- I
connect
think I
those
just heard
dots.
a I think I just heard a quote there we're gonna have to use.
I don't think those dots can be connected without strong communications, especially to your last question, in a world that's increasingly complex and growing more complex by the day, fast-paced, and perhaps more importantly, a world that is more and more interconnected, requires the ability to bridge those two, vision and execution, to inspire, to motivate, to unify. Critical.
Absolutely. And now let's flip it a little bit. Let's talk a bit about those in communications and PR and the related industries. What do they need to do today to really step up and into their leadership to be more effective leaders?
Yeah, it's another great question, something I think about often and have begun to talk about more regularly. And it goes to something I think we are increasingly lacking today in leadership, which is courage.
Mm.
And I have been around a little while, as you mentioned, similar to you. There used to be a time where in our function, we heralded ourselves as the conscience of our organizations. I don't hear that as much today. And one of the things that worries me is I believe that as our communications discipline has worked to help our organizations and our leaders adapt, we have yielded that position of conscience to pragmatism. No one wants to be the tallest blade of grass in this environment. No one wants to be the sharp, pointy thing in the room. And therein lies a ton of risk. You think about the need today, more than in our recent history, for organizations and our leaders to have a voice and a perspective that provides a vision, a light, a direction in what are really challenging times for us as a society.
I agree. I think in scary times, our people need more courage from their leaders. And I think in corporations, in the media, in some higher ed locations, courage is not so much around anymore. You really need to look for it. And I'm so glad you mentioned courage. It takes a lot. Well, I think it takes guts to be a leader today. I think it takes, to your point, takes guts to be truly effective in PR.
Yes.
But a lot of people are frightened. So let me ask you a follow-up.
Yeah.
What can a leader in higher ed, in PR, in corp com, what can they do to tap their courage?
Yeah, I think I don't know that I know the perfect answer. I'd say I think a couple things in terms of tapping into courage. One, it's got to be that foundational vision, belief, and a North Star that is, directionally where, you're trying to take an organization or you're trying to take a leader or you're trying to go personally, individually as leaders. And so I think being grounded in a vision and aspiration, supported by an aperture that is global, that realizes we are more human and more similar than we are distinctive. And I think that ability to speak to our collective humanity is critical in that question. And I think that probably is more the secret sauce than most of us appreciate today.
Well, I think the times dictate. If you look at what are the major leadership skills, you've mentioned a number of them, vision and values and what have you. But as times change, I think some skills become more important than others. And I
Yeah.
think today courage really rises to the top.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about two of my favorite topics, communications and leadership. Now we're going to layer on another one of my favorite topics for obvious reasons, and that's coaching. There are tremendous connections between leadership and coaching. Why must leaders, well, if you agree, why must leaders be great coaches?
They should be. I think words matter here, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I
yeah.
would say, I'd say great leaders are by the very nature of their responsibility, good coaches. Leaders who are not good coaches, I don't believe can be good leaders. And so I think leaders who are not able to develop, and developing requires coaching and mentoring their teams to success, to the next level, to the next opportunity, um, probably should not be leaders. And that's not a bad thing. Everyone is not cut out for leadership. I think some of what we've got to unpack, in your question is what has been a view for a long time, some out of business schools and management schools, that everyone had this trajectory, that it was a natural progression of growth and development was, achieving leadership. That's not really true. And I think that's allowed us to perhaps diminish the importance of coaching and mentoring and developing as a real skill. And there have been some phenomenal people in my life who've had that skill, and there have been some people who were duds at it and who probably should not have been leaders. But
Yeah, I mean, followers of the podcast know, at least in my observation within the PR area, we have promoted people to positions of leadership when they really shouldn't be. Maybe they should be subject matter experts. Maybe they should just, run an offering kind of by themselves with a little bit of support. But the skills of being a great PR practitioner and then manager, there are other skills that are needed to be a
yes,
great leader. So you've got me thinking about is the fact that it's not just that we shouldn't promote people into leadership till they're ready and mentored and skill. And I agree with that. But there are other things you can do to contribute and have a wonderful career, have an
yes,
absolutely wonderful career. So I hope more and more people agree with us. The one thing I always think about leadership and coaching As coaches, we ask, truly experienced certified coaches, we don't give advice. We know how to ask a variety of questions that engage the brain of our coaching clients so that they figure out the answers that's right for them and their organizations. And I think great leaders have to do the same thing. You fight the urge to tell and you replace it with asking.
Yes.
And I think that signals to the recipient, oh, my leader thinks I can figure this out. Oh. And that I think that's very empowering.
I agree.
Okay. Thank you. Last question. Something about Torod Neptune that we wouldn't know maybe from your LinkedIn profile and that might surprise us.
Yeah, I love that question. And so there are a number of things I think that might be surprising. I think something that I've grown to believe is more important to verbalize to your question that's not evident from my LinkedIn is I truly believe I've learned more from the failures in my life than the triumphs. And the places where I've taken risks that did not work out have taught me more than the places where I did, and the result was positive. And so I've really grown to embrace those failures and the risks that did not manifest themselves in great victories as the things that have made me the sum total of the leader I am today, more than those watermark victories.
So I have to ask you to be courageous. Since you raised it, would you be willing to share one of those, and I'll put them in air quotes, failures, um, and what you learned from it, how it made you stronger or better?
Yeah. So I'll say I took a risk in probably midpoint in my career to take a job that would allow me to fill a blank, right? So I've always had a vision for my career where I wanted to get to. And between where I was and where I wanted to get to, there were a couple of stops that were missing. And so I took a bit of a sideways turn, lateral, to fill a gap. And it was really not a great experience. And I think I learned from that the gap perhaps was less a gap and more, just not a good place to be culturally, environmentally, right? Some of the behaviors that were required to be successful in that gap were things that did not reinforce what I believe about, again, humanity and being a good person. And so while I filled that gap on the resume, it was a horrible experience. And so I wound up making a bit of a left turn back. But again, learned so much about myself in that experience and learned so much about being thoughtful about the places that I pause, the places I invest energy and time, and the people, quite honestly,
Yeah.
that you
Well,
allow yourself to be surrounded by.
well, I'm sorry you had to experience it, but I'm glad the air quotes applied and that you did turn it into a success and that you learned a really big lesson there. And I really appreciate your candor in sharing it today. I think, we all say we want to lead people who are willing to take educated risks.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is for leaders to share, here's where I failed. I'm a big believer in the air quotes, because I think and we want our people to think of failures as steps on the road to ultimate success.
Yes.
And so many leaders I admire talk about what they learned from failure. And, I may have shared this before. Oh, goodness. Edison, the inventor, the creator of Honda Motors, Ella Fitzgerald, the Beatles, Einstein, um, Oprah, and Dolly Parton have all shared about very vocally what they learned from their failures. Wouldn't that be an interesting dinner party, right?
Yes.
If you could have
Yes.
all of them,
It would
if
be
you
a
could
great
have
one.
all of them together. So if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
So again, I'm on LinkedIn and Blue Sky, and so in terms of connections to follow me socially, I try and be pretty active in terms of my public platforms, and then I'm pretty easy to reach in terms of email as well. And so from my LinkedIn, you can get to my email, and I try and make myself as accessible as possible. So those are the easiest routes.
Thank you. Thank you just so much for sharing your leadership wisdom. I'm going to share if people want to get in touch and discuss further the topics we talked about today, or have always been interested in, well, what is leadership coaching? And do I need it? Do I want it? How can I benefit from it? I ask that they also find me on LinkedIn. There are many Ken Jacobs. I think you might be one of the few Torod B Neptunes. You may be the
I think
only
so. Yes, I've never
Torod
met
B
another
Neptune.
yet.
But there's a lot of Ken Jacobs, but I'm the one with the initials after. I think I'm the only one with initials after my name, or they can reach me at Ken at JACOBSCOMM.com. Tarad Neptune, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Again, go Qs. It was great to see you just only a few weeks ago, and then to
Yes.
talk about your appearance and finding the time. I really appreciate that. And as we always say, till next time, keep on taking the lead.